A Vietnam veteran's memorial bench for his fallen friend was ripped out and discarded by an HOA president chasing visual order. Cold and dismissive, Pamela Grayson called it clutter, sparking outrage among veterans across the county. But Frank Delaney had powerful allies, and what followed turned a local injustice into a statewide cause. Just wait until you hear how this battle for respect ended with justice standing tall by the lake. No one in Lakeview Estates imagined that a simple bench could spark a fight for dignity. Frank Delaney was 71, a Vietnam veteran, and had called the neighborhood home for more than 3 decades. A quiet man with a warm smile, he was well known for his daily walks down to the lake, sometimes alone, sometimes with his best friend, Mike Turner. Frank and Mike had shared nearly 40 years of friendship, much of it spent side by side with fishing rods in hand beneath the big oak by the water. They'd talked about life, loss, and the friends they'd both left behind overseas. For them, the lake wasn't just a place, it was a piece of home. When Mike passed suddenly the previous fall, it struck Frank harder than he cared to admit. Days at the lake felt hollow, without the easy laughter and steady presence of his old friend. So Frank decided to honor him the only way he knew how. Quietly, without seeking attention or approval, he had a local carpenter craft a simple wooden bench. On the backrest, in clean letters, it read, "In memory of Sergeant Michael Turner, always fishing." Frank placed it beneath the same oak tree where they'd spent so many afternoons. It wasn't fancy or out of place. The bench blended naturally with the setting, a silent tribute to brotherhood and memory. Neighbors noticed. Some left small flags or flowers. Others paused during their walks to sit for a moment in reflection. It became a quiet symbol of respect, one the community embraced. But 3 months later, without warning, Frank returned home to find a letter in his mailbox. The envelope was stamped with the HOA seal. The message inside, signed by Pamela Grayson, the newly elected HOA president, was cold and direct. Your unauthorized bench installation violates community aesthetic guidelines. You are hereby required to remove it within 7 days or face escalating fines. Frank read it twice, then a third time. He sat down, the paper trembling in his hand. Aesthetic guidelines. The HOA had never regulated benches by the lake before. There were no formal notices about new rules, no posted objections. This wasn't about regulations. Frank felt it in his bones. It was about someone's narrow view of control versus the memory of a man who'd earned his place in the sun. What should have been a quiet gesture of remembrance had become a target for enforcement. And as the weight of it sank in, Frank's heart broke all over again. This was no longer about a piece of wood beneath a tree. It was about respect, for friendship, for service, and for a promise not to forget. Pamela Grayson was not known for kindness. A recent arrival from out of state, she had moved into Lakeview Estates barely a year ago. Within months, she had run an aggressive campaign to become HOA president. Her platform was polished and unapologetic. Modernize the community, restore visual order, and eliminate unsightly clutter. Many longtime residents had been skeptical, but few expected how far Pamela's vision would go once she took office. Almost immediately, she launched a wave of enforcement initiatives targeting anything she considered non-conforming. Decorative flags vanished from porches, garden gnomes disappeared overnight. Memorial plaques and small birdhouses were cited as unauthorized fixtures. Where others saw character, Pamela saw a problem to be scrubbed away. And now she had fixed her sights on Frank Delaney's bench. To Pamela, it wasn't a heartfelt memorial. It was an unauthorized installation, just another item on her growing list of community violations. When Frank received the removal letter, he didn't act out of defiance. He called her. He asked for a meeting. Sitting across from her at the HOA office, Frank explained, voice steady but strained, what the bench meant, how he and Mike had spent decades by that lake, how it had become a place of quiet remembrance, not only for him, but for neighbors who respected its meaning. He even offered compromises, to move the bench slightly, to adjust its color if needed, to work with any reasonable request, so long as the tribute remained. But Pamela's response was chilling. "I don't care what it means," she said flatly in front of 2 board members. "If we allow your bench, soon we'll have a dozen more. This place will start to look like a graveyard." The words cut through the room like ice. Word of the exchange spread quickly through the neighborhood. Veterans who lived in Lakeview Estates, and their families, were appalled. Mike Turner had served 3 tours overseas. Frank wore a bronze star. The bench wasn't clutter, it wasn't graffiti, it wasn't abandoned junk. It was a simple memorial to a brother in arms. Outrage simmered. But Pamela, seemingly unfazed, pressed forward. Then came the final blow. One crisp morning, as Frank made his usual walk to the lake, something felt off. The tree stood bare beneath a pale sky. The spot where the bench had stood was empty. Heart-pounding, Frank searched the grounds until he found it. Behind the maintenance shed, tossed carelessly among debris, lay the bench. Its plaque scratched, its surface marred. No notice, no courtesy, no warning. Frank stood frozen. Grief, fresh as the day he lost Mike, surged through him, twisted now by a rising tide of rage. This was no longer about a bench. It was about respect. And someone had just crossed a line that could not be ignored. Frank could have walked away. He could have mourned quietly and let the bench remain broken behind the shed. But not this time. The more he stared at that scratched plaque and splintered wood, the more one truth became clear. Mike deserved better. Every veteran deserved better. Frank wiped the dust from the plaque, took a deep breath, and started making calls. First, he reached out to Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 1147, where he and Mike had both been members for years. The post commander listened in silence as Frank told him what had happened. His voice, normally steady, cracked as he described seeing the bench discarded like trash. "You did right by calling us," the commander replied. "We'll take it from here." Next came the American Legion, another long-standing brotherhood of veterans. Then, the Marine Riders Motorcycle Club, known for honoring memorials and fallen comrades. Finally, Frank called the County Veteran Services office, ensuring the story would reach official channels. And it did. Within days, word spread across veteran circles and community boards alike. Photos of the abandoned bench circulated online. Screenshots of Pamela Grayson's remarks made their way onto social media. Outrage rippled far beyond Lakeview Estates. Veterans from neighboring towns, fellow service members, and their families were furious. For many, this wasn't just about one bench. It was about a pattern. Too many times, memorials quietly removed or dismissed by those who didn't understand their meaning. This time they would not stay silent. A protest was organized, lawful, peaceful, and highly visible. On a crisp Saturday morning, the streets near Lakeview Estates filled with the steady hum of motorcycles and the rustle of flags. More than 200 veterans arrived, many in dress blues or decorated jackets. Others wore leather vests adorned with unit patches. All came with purpose. They gathered at the community entrance, a sea of resolve. In their hands, banners and signs read, "Honor our fallen, respect their memory. Veterans remember, HOA forgot. One bench, one brother, one big mistake." The scene was powerful, solemn, unified, impossible to ignore. Local news crews arrived within the hour. Cameras captured veterans standing shoulder to shoulder, saluting in front of the neighborhood sign. Interviews aired live, with veterans explaining the true weight of what had been taken away. Inside her home, Pamela Grayson watched the coverage. The smug certainty she once carried gave way to something far less steady. Phone lines at the HOA office rang non-stop. Emails flooded in. HOA board members, once supportive, now grew uneasy. The veterans had drawn a line, and for the first time, it was Pamela who found herself cornered. The pressure did not ease. It only grew stronger. As images of the veterans' protest spread across social media, the story gained momentum far beyond the quiet streets of Lakeview Estates. Veterans groups across the state shared the posts. Community members posted messages of support. Soon, local news stations were joined by regional networks. What had started as a neighborhood dispute had become a public outcry. Phone calls poured into the HOA office, emails arrived by the hundreds, residents demanded answers, non-residents voiced their outrage. The county commissioner personally contacted the board, expressing serious concern about the HOA's treatment of veterans. And then came a letter from the state leadership of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. It was firm, unmistakable in tone. If the matter was not resolved swiftly and respectfully, a formal complaint and legal action would follow, drawing the attention of state and national veteran organizations. Inside the HOA, board members could no longer ignore the storm. Support for Pamela Grayson evaporated almost overnight. Legal counsel warned of potential liability and escalating public relations damage. Under mounting pressure, the board called an emergency meeting. Behind closed doors, they reached a decision. Pamela was instructed to issue a public apology on behalf of the HOA. The board then passed an emergency resolution, one that formally allowed memorial installations honoring veterans within the community, provided they met basic safety and maintenance standards. Frank's bench was to be the first approved under this new policy. The process was fast-tracked. But the veterans of Lakeview Estates weren't finished. Led by members of VFW Post 1147 and the local American Legion, they came together to build a new bench, crafted from solid oak, reinforced for longevity. A polished metal plaque was mounted on its backrest, in memory of Sergeant Michael Turner, always fishing, forever honored. On a clear morning just weeks later, veterans gathered once more, this time in ceremony, not protest. Flags waved gently in the breeze. Uniforms gleamed beneath the sun. Frank stood at the lakeside spot, surrounded by fellow veterans, neighbors, and even local officials. When the new bench was installed beneath the familiar oak, dozens of veterans raised their hands in salute. Some wiped away tears. Others stood in solemn respect. Pamela? The former president quietly submitted her resignation the following week, leaving her position without fanfare. And in the years since, a new tradition has taken root. Every Memorial Day, residents and veterans gather at the lake for a tribute to fallen service members. Frank's bench now serves as the honored centerpiece, a place of remembrance and unity. The bench she tried to erase has become a permanent symbol of respect and resilience. Justice wasn't just restored, it was enshrined.